dedicated themselves.
So we left off where your mother, grandmother, Jessie Maud Merrittsville Green Seville, and Walter Green had decided to go to China. And I think that's where we left off. And so carry on from there, please.
All right. Well, Jessie and Walter had a son, and then Walter and the baby boy died of, I believe, what did people have then?
TB, diphtheria, cholera, scarlet fever.
Maybe diphtheria. And so she was left a widow. But she decided that she would go to China anyway, without her husband and son, baby son. So that is how she got to China just before the turn of the century. So we're up to about 1900. And so she went there and she did her language work in Chinese, and she was on the field, as they say in missions. She finished her language work and went to her assignment, which was in Wenzhou, which is on the coast of China. I think they did their language work in Shanghai. I'm pretty sure about that. So she was in Wenzhou when the Boxer Rebellion broke out, and she was saved by Chinese believers, many of whom were martyred at that time when the Boxers decided enough of those Westerners. Anyway, foreign religion, foreign devils. And there's an exciting story that she, with other missionaries from Wenzhou, went out to an island in the harbor near the city, and a great storm came and cut off those would-be pursuers who would have still gone after those who were escaping for their lives. And then she and the others were taken to Japan. They were picked up by, I think, an English ship and went to Japan. Hope you have those maps in your heads. Anyway, so she stayed there for several years, I think. And then she returned to Wenzhou, which we used to call Wenchao when I was growing up. But the pronunciation changed during the 20th century. Anyway, and so afterwards, she met my grandfather, Seville, and he was proceeding to, his way, making his way through the channels to being a missionary. So he also went to language school, and the mission had very strict rules concerning the conduct of single missionaries. So they were always chaperoned, which is, this is by now it's 1905 or something. But grandfather would, now where was this? Was it Shanghai or was he in Wenzhou by now? He would hang around on the porch of the house where Grandmother Seville was living and converse with her. And she was not of a mind to marry again. She was content with being a single missionary. at that time. But he persisted, and I think the story is that he asked her to marry him, 3 times or something, and finally she agreed to marry him. So, yep, he knew he had a winner there. Now, did I tell about Grandfather
Wasn't he
Seville?
quite short?
Yes.
Grandfather Seville?
Grandfather liked being in China. Everybody was short, and he was short.
Was he 5 foot or?
Yeah, he was 5'3".
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. And she was not short, right? She was taller.
No, she was short.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
She was about that height, I think.
Yeah. You did not tell us yet about Grandfather Seville's. Oh, well, yes, we did talk about Seville's in Pittsburgh area.
In Bellevue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can move on to the Seville sisters.
Okay.
And brother.
Yeah. So, so they were married, and we have a fine picture of the two of them in their wedding clothes. Of course, because they belonged to the China Inland Mission, they dressed in Chinese clothes. And my grandmother, Seville, worked in the girls' school. And the idea of educating girls was quite foreign to most Chinese families. Now I'm thinking, since I've been telling this story, I'm thinking about my grandmother and her life and thinking she and my grandfather were just so bonded to their Chinese family, their Chinese believing sisters and brothers, and I hope that we get to talk about that more, but I'm not sure whether now's the time or not. But when I was in China, Jeremy and I were taken out to dinner by a man whose family felt like they owed everything to the Sevilles because his, I think, great uncle learned English. Not that he didn't have money, this great uncle, but he asked Grandfather Seville if Grandfather Seville would teach him English. And because of that skill, the family survived and throve through the decades of the 20th century. And so this man took Jeremy and me out to dinner in a very fancy place. It was quite an experience. But it was...
And that was in Shanghai, or?
No, that was in... I don't know. Yes, it was.
Because you were over there to... Is that when you went, obviously, for the wedding of Nicholas and Ya? Or wedding ceremony?
Yep. So, so there were these ties, which probably, if you know missionary history, you know the deep ties that form between believers. So, to skip a couple of decades, when my grandmother Seville was deemed unfit for service on the field, which was in about 1920 something. She felt it very keenly, and always, from thereafter, always felt cut off from her dearly beloved friends in China.
But why was she deemed unfit, Mom?
For health reasons.
Ah, okay.
But that's an old story, I mean, an old story. I don't know if you know, but there's missionaries like Lilias Trotter was deemed unfit for missionary service in Morocco, so she did not go out with sponsored by a mission board, but just self-supporting entity, a single, And so, but the Sevilles were not, didn't do that. So, during the years that the Sevilles were in China, they had 3 daughters and a son, and the son was named John Eldridge Seville, and he only lived to be about a year old, and he died of dysentery, and my grandfather never got over it. You like that? Never got over it. So when I knew my grandfather, he was in his 80s, and he would shake his head and describe the terrible days that preceded his son's death, and little John got weaker and weaker, and there was nothing to help him, so then he died. But he was a really sprightly little chap, and at, I think, 9 months, he was already maybe walking, or anyway, standing, and so he was a very bright and physically advanced toddler, or child, really. So the firstborn, though, is Janet, and so we have photographs, and I believe that the photograph's already on record, of Janet, and then her little brother John, and this happy family of Jesse and George, and the 2 children before John's death. And my grandmother, I think, looking at those photographs, I think that my grandmother never smiled that so wholeheartedly as she did in those pictures with her baby son. And you are hearing the whole story. This is not a story I knew growing up, but, to lose your husband and son, and firstborn son, and then to lose this baby boy, this is heartbreaking. She, but, so this is a diversion, but I heard from someone that my grandfather Seville didn't really like to have grandmother Seville referring to her first husband and child. So that must have been, she couldn't say, now I've lost another son. I've lost a really baby boy. But anyway, because grandfather Seville would, like that Walter Green's baby didn't fit into grandfather Seville's picture of his wife's past, his wife's family. Eudora Welty talks about this phenomenon of past families and being a shadow on current families. So that's my end of my digression. After this, they had a baby girl, Elsa. That is my mother, Elsa Ruth Seville, born in 1909. And she used to say that she was born in '09, which made her seem really old. Like that's like, 19th century talk, isn't it? What, 9? And then came along baby Edith. So she was the youngest of the children, the youngest of the 3 girls. So my mother would tell people that she was born in China, and they would say, "Oh yes, I think I can see that." And I'm like, no, I was born in China, but I'm not at all Chinese. My parents were Americans, and so am I. Wholly white, wholly American. But there's a good piece of my mother's take on life and wit, and it's like, think about it. Now I don't. And wow, that was a long time ago. So she and my mother and her family returned from China, and were not going to be going back.
But they went to school there, and
Yes.
when they were pretty young, they were separated from their
Yes.
parents, right?
Yes. So those are wonderful stories, and I'm not sure if, rather than going on to their U.S. life, I should talk about my mother's experiences as a child in China. So I think she might have been 6 when she started going to school at the missionary school, which is kind of well known at Chifu, which has a Chinese, the settlement where the school was is a kind of a holiday sort of knowledge. It was known for being a holiday place. So that's Chifu, and it has a Chinese name, which Chinese people like, oh, yes, yes, because it was on the shore, and my mother would recount that as of maybe the 1st of May or something, they were allowed to go barefoot.
At the school?
Yeah.
So at 6, she was sent in a boat, right?
Running
to
around
Chifu.
on the beach. So she had to go from Wenzhou to Chifu, which is much farther south. So one of her most enduring stories was how she was in a storm, and I was very impressed with this when I was a child. So the ship that she was on, which was not a big ship, the boat, but it wasn't a boat, but anyway, small ship, and the ship would be carried up by the waves and then go down, 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 and she thought to herself, will it ever come up again? And then it would go up, up, up. So she and her sister Janet were in their bunks, and they were with a missionary lady, because they were all called aunties, those ladies. And so they were traveling to their school with the auntie. And she would just wonder whether, will we ever come up again? And Janet, most helpfully, because that's the kind of mentality Aunt Janet had, she said, now, Elsa, put your hands across your chest, like in a prayerful position, and then when they find us in our watery grave, they will know that we were Christians. So they lived in a belief, or in a terror that they were going to die, that this storm was going to be the end of them. And my mother, this is interesting, and I have to see if I can confirm this with someone, but my mother had an appendectomy when she was at school. So she was this little tyke with no parents around, just the aunties. And she also had a broken collarbone just because she had somehow fallen from a stool, I think. So she suffered through these things far from her mother. And she said that when she was recovering, I think that was from the appendectomy, this auntie came and sang, when he cometh to gather his children. And she said, and I just hated that. Those of you who know the hymns will recognize the jewels in his crown. It's like, no, I don't want to stop singing that. But in general, she didn't complain a lot about her years in the mission school. I mean, that's. I think that the younger teachers were, as they often are in these boarding schools, were pretty lively people. There are generations of people who went to the mission field and just teach in the boarding schools. I mean, we know about Eric Little, and that's years ahead of my mother's years. But if you think of her running along the beach in bare feet, then you think, well, yeah, I guess part of it was not so nice. But there were a lot of negative stories of children in boarding schools, in mission boarding schools, or in boarding schools, because it was the English way, and that's really what had happened with the China Inland Mission. Is they came from a society where children were sent to boarding school, and so they sort of thought, yeah. Let those of us who have wrestled with where to school our children take note. You can't win.